Hey everybody, welcome back to another episode of the Manufacturing Stream podcast. As per usual, my name is Chris. I'm a content guy here at L2L, and today I am joined by two really fantastic people from the world of manufacturing. We have Tom Williams joining us from one of our customers at Pandrol. I'm going to let him give himself a good introduction in a few minutes, but we're also joined by our own Michael Hurd, who works on the implementation team here at L2L. They have a combined many decades of manufacturing experience, whether it's in process or maintenance, leadership, all of the above. So today we're going to tackle some topics around the world of manufacturing, about process engineering. We'll probably dive into a little bit of maintenance stuff. But without further ado, Tom, if you could just tell me a little bit about yourself. Where do you come from? What's your background? What do you love about manufacturing?
Cool, thanks Chris. So my name is Tom Williams. I've got a background predominantly in aerospace engineering. So I'm from South Wales in Great Britain originally, but I've moved more and more north through the United Kingdom as my career has developed. Came out of university with a master's in aerospace and worked predominantly with Rolls-Royce doing jet engines. So that's when I kind of dived into process engineering, kind of accidentally. Then worked my way up through Rolls-Royce into various different jobs across that sector. Quite lucky with Rolls-Royce in that you get to cover all different industries, so not just jet engines. I did nuclear submarines, so building nuclear reactors. We did robotics and automation, safety engineering, so lots of different bits within there. I then left to go to modular housing, so complete change of industry, but I thought if I can apply myself to all these different kind of mechanical areas, why not get into house building? So we had a bit of a startup company. So did that for 2 or 3 years, learning how to build a house, but on a production line. And then more recently, the last couple of years, found myself working for a company called Pandrol. So we make rail fastenings all over the world. So the little clips that you see that hold the rail track to the sleeper, they're called Pandrol clips. And we have the majority market share around the world. So next time you're on a train, have a little look. There's a rail fastening. There's a strong chance it'll be a Pandrol clip.
Look down and see a Pandrol clip.
Yeah.
Fantastic. I can. Will other rail enthusiasts know what a Pandrol clip is? Can I flex on a railway person by saying I had a call with a guy from Pandrol? I think that'd be pretty cool.
For sure. I mean, coming into the industry, I had no idea what they were. I'll put my hands up. But yeah, very quickly you get a love for the product. It's a very simple product. It looks very simple. Obviously, there's lots of complications around manufacturing and all the different factories and geopolitics and stuff. But yeah, the name itself, especially within the UK, a lot of the maintenance teams, they don't call them a rail fastening. It's just called a Pandrol clip, almost like we call a vacuum cleaner in the UK a Hoover. Yeah. We use the brand name. So yeah, I'm not sure what it's like around the world, but in some countries, certainly it's just called a Pandrol clip.
So like Band-Aid or Kleenex.
Yeah, exactly.
In the States, yeah. That's a good place to be. Very cool. Thanks for sharing that, Tom. And the other guy on this call, Michael, can you tell us a little bit about who you are? You haven't been on this pod with me before. I don't know if you ever have been with Eric. So If you could tell our listeners and our watchers a little bit about yourself, what gets you excited about manufacturing, what do you do here at L2L, and where you been?
Sure. This is actually my first podcast, so it's going to go on my resume right after.
Good.
Michael Hurd. So I'm a senior implementation consultant at L2L. Been with the company 3 years now. Prior to that, I have about 20 years of manufacturing experience. My first role was at a company that used to be Rolls-Royce. I joined shortly after it was bought out by a company called Triumph Group. Rolls-Royce was a vendor of ours. We had a lot of vendors. We built gears and stuff like that for the jet engines and helicopters and all kinds of stuff. Anyway, started in the receiving dock, started to move up into the manufacturing world, kind of trying to figure out where I wanted to be as a young man. Bounced around for a little bit. I was there about 10 years and then joined different manufacturing operations. So over the course of my career, I've been in aerospace, the nuclear industry, the food industry, some automotive, been all over the place. So The last 5 or 6 years of my career, I was in maintenance, planning, and leadership, where I actually was introduced to L2L, deployed it as a customer, and then was very driven to join the company. And about a year later, after I made that decision, joined the team.
Cool. Fantastic. I promise I did not know that you both worked at Rolls-Royce when I set this up. How many people do they employ worldwide? It must be a pretty massive company, yeah?
Yeah, 50,000. I think that was,
Okay.
when was I last there? 7 years ago. About 20,000 in the UK, I think, alone.
Okay.
And then, all around the world. And the supply chain's a lot bigger than that, obviously.
Yeah.
I think it's well over 100,000 if you include all the supply chain. Yeah,
Wow.
It's a big old operation.
Yes.
So me asking if you two know each other is like asking if you know another Welsh guy that I know, Tom. Okay.
Yeah, something like that. Although
I
that did
see.
happen to me once. Somebody asked, do I know this person in Rolls-Royce? And I actually did. But I've been asked it 100 times. And yeah, so 1 out of 100 isn't too bad.
It's usually no. Okay.
Yeah.
Fantastic. Cool. Well, I mostly want to talk about processes today. And I thought I would frame this podcast and kind of our conversation around what is an effective process, what makes an effective process. There's a lot of components that go into that. But before I jump into that, I'm going to ask you, Tom, first. Can you talk a little bit about the current environment and the kind of the geopolitical climate and how it's affecting your work at Pandrol? I mean, I've talked to a few people on here. I think the last person was in the steel industry, and they share there's a lot going on in steel right now. What are some particular challenges that you're facing in railroad?
Yeah, so it varies a lot all around the world. If you can imagine that we produce in most continents, not all continents, but most continents, and we produce and we supply to the large majority of countries. So things can change very, very quickly. A lot of it this year has been driven by the tariffs that Trump's put in place. That's affected not just the product, but also the process. So we build a lot of our machinery in England and ship it. For example, we've just shipped a machine over to Memphis, to our facility there. So we didn't know what the cost was going to be. It's a big steel bending machine. We had no idea. So a lot of uncertainty, which can throw the project costs up quite a lot.
Yeah.
But there's also lots of challenges then around shipping with our actual product. So they're metal clips, they're very heavy, depending on what's going on around the world and where we can ship and what shipping lanes we can use. It can cause some issues. But we are quite lucky in that we can produce in all of these different locations. So if there's specific problems coming out of one country where we might have a facility, we do have the ability to go and move that. Whereas our competitors have gone for the more mass production route, 2 or 3 facilities that can produce way more volume than one of our facilities. So it's kind of that way up to say, do we want the economies of scale producing at such high volume, or do we want that flexibility? And through things like COVID, things like the shipping lane getting blocked up a few years ago, I think
I
we all
remember that
one. We have that flexibility. So yeah, we've got the ability to adapt in that sense. Specific things right now though, so the war in Ukraine is a big one for us. We have supplied clips into Ukraine. So generally speaking, for rebuilding countries, a lot of rail infrastructure is one of the first things that people want to get in place for delivering supplies all over the place. So yeah, we often get involved with things like that.
Wow. I heard the word flexibility, and you say that this is something that you have over your competitors. What is it in your supply chain that gives you that flexibility and allows you to be nimble and to switch that production across a border?
Purely the location of our facilities. So we've been, our company has kind of come about through a lot of mergers and acquisitions, and then starting up new facilities on the smaller scale side of things. So essentially what we've been able to do is almost put a facility on each continent and then supply from that facility. But then we've also looked at various different places within, say, Asia. So we have a facility in India, within China. So we look at some of the key markets of where products are going to be required over the next few years, and then try and adapt our production processes for that. So at the moment, we don't have an awful lot of flexibility within the facility. So we make 2 or 3 very distinct types of fastenings, and each production line is very much geared to that. So it'd almost be like, from an automotive perspective, you can only make one car type down your production line. For us, you can only make one clip type down the production line, and they're not very adaptable. So that's our strategy now going forward. We're looking at how we can flex within that production line, do some tool changeovers in order to give us the ability to change based on the customer demand, because it does change really, really fast. Even within the USA, for example, we might need to change from one product type to another quite quickly, depending on the different rail authority that we're working for, different states that are asking us to deliver clips within to that facility or within to that state as such. So yeah, that adaptability is a big thing for us, and it's not something we've had before, but we're looking to develop that over the next couple of years.
What are like the key parts of that development? Just if you were planning out a flexibility roadmap in general terms, what would you say are the few most important components of that?
So our process is very much the same apart from one key machine. So essentially we heat a metal bar, we bend it, we quench it, we temper it, and then we might coat it depending on the country requirements. That is the same process for all the different fastening types. Yeah. But when we want to go and change product, we need to bend it slightly differently, as it's a completely different shape. So over the years, we've developed 2 or 3 very different machines to go and do that operation. So what we're looking to do at the moment is develop a machine where you can actually take out the tool as a large cartridge, as like a single minute exchange of die. You say the word SMED within the rail industry, and there's not an awful lot of understanding around it. But if you say fast tool change, people start to understand it, certainly within Pandrol. So at the moment, if you want to change like that, there's a lot of nuances within the production line that wouldn't allow you to, or it would take a week or maybe 2 weeks, maybe even longer to change over the products in that sense. So we're looking to develop a machine that would actually just be a few minutes, sliding in a big set as an example and sliding out what you would need, all pre-prepared offline by the tool room, which at the moment is a lot of it is done online, so our downtime is quite high at the moment.
Yeah. So it's modularity within the actual equipment.
Yeah, exactly that.
Very
and there's lots of examples from automotive that do that. And yeah, we're looking at things like tracks to actually run the tooling in. So there's very little room for error when you're actually lining up your tooling, making sure everything's datumed, making sure everything's refurbished. And that's kind of where we see the integration with L2L within Pandrol as well, something that can help us manage that system too.
It's a significant investment to be tooled up and ready for that kind of thing, right? That you're not going to see much of a return on for a while until you incorporate it. So I can imagine
exactly that.
Difficult to just roll it out and get it approved. There's a lot of money tied up in that kind of tooling.
Yeah, and the way we produce is very much within the different countries. So we are quite independent across the factories. We try and bring everybody together under a common process. But in terms of countries delivering, so at the moment, Brazil, our factory in Brazil, would generally deliver to the whole of South America. Memphis will deliver to the whole of North America. So trying to bring everybody together in terms of a sales volume is quite difficult in order to go and get that level of investment to go and make major changes. But the group itself is really coming towards that strategy as well to give us that adaptability. So yeah, it's a really interesting time in Pandrol.
For our listeners who might not know what a process engineer is, what do you do at Pandrol, Tom? What do you when you are engineering a process? What are you like? Where do you begin? Where do you start?
I would probably move away from the Pandrol example as like a pure process engineer, just to give the listeners an idea. Think of it as in an assembly operation where you're trying to make something or put something together. It's how you make that product in the most efficient use of somebody's time. So you can have all the different machinery within a process, but ultimately the biggest kind of cost within a process is the labour, and obviously depending on where you're producing as well. So how do you make sure that somebody can produce as many products as the customer needs in order for you to sell in the most efficient use of their time? So you start essentially with a blank production line and you break your product assembly down into all the different stages. Now, if stage 1 takes 10 minutes and stage 2 takes 5 minutes, the person doing stage 2 will be stood around for 5 minutes waiting for the person from stage 1 to be complete. So the role of a process engineer in an assembly line is to try and balance out all of those activities. So using that example, in the purest sense, you would try and get each of those stages running at 7.5 minutes. So it's a very smooth, level process. Now the complexities of that get really, really high when you start talking about, for example, aerospace, assembling a jet engine.
Yeah.
So you can have an army of process engineers all trying to reduce and trying to improve those processes. But fundamentally, if you can then improve the process, you can reduce the overall cost to the customer or increase your profits as a business.
And I'm gonna get to the big question today is how do you define a good process?
For me, it's a process that the operators are bought into. So a process engineer can sit up in their office designing the most amazing looking process with lasers and shiny things plastered all over it. But fundamentally, if the operators haven't bought into it or they've not been involved or engaged throughout the process design, it will just fall over as soon as it's implemented. So it's one thing I always encourage my engineers to do right at the start: go and speak to the people on the shop floor that have been doing this thing for a long time. You know, it's those are the guys and girls that are going to be running this thing long term. And if they feel like they're bought into it, if they've had a technical input into it, they'll make sure that it runs very, very smoothly when you go and input it. So yeah, that engagement is really, really big for me.
It's almost funny how common that is in these conversations that I have, right? Like, Michael, I'm sure that you'd say the exact same thing about
100%.
Successful implementation, right? It's generating buy-in. And so what are some things when you're designing a process or when you are implementing something, Michael, what are some things that you do personally to make that buy-in and that engagement as meaningful as possible from the ground up?
I mean, much to the same as Tom mentioned, you've got to bring in the people that are actually going to be using the process,
Yeah.
and get their experience, get their feedback, get their impression of how that process is being deployed. If it's deployed in stages, how's it working? What's not working? Right? You have to get them involved in the some stage of development of that process in order for it to be effective.
Yeah.
People are resistant to change. You're going to have that too, but working in maintenance for a long time, the most common trope I always had was mechanics and engineers kind of having that back and forth, because engineers thought it should work this way. It worked on paper, and then and mechanics get it, and they're like, none of this works. And I'm being dramatic, of course, but yeah, those two trades really need to work together. The frontline team, the people using the process. That's what defines a good process. And the more you revise that process and refine it, the more I trust it.
Yeah. And Tom, I'll field this one to you. What does the process improvement strategy look like from you? And that can either be granular or large scale, however you'd like to answer that. But, Michael just mentioned improving processes. And we know that it incorporates feedback, but you as kind of the overseer of an entire plant or an entire supply chain, what do you look at when you look at overall process improvement? How do you benchmark it? How do you get those pieces moving on a regular basis?
Yeah, I generally try and assign my engineers a cost target to hit each year. So fundamentally, we're working for a business that thrives on profit or survives on profit. So for me, I try and do it as a multiplier of somebody's salary, just to keep it interesting and keep it quite competitive amongst the teams. So it doesn't always work, depending on the business that I've been a part of. Sometimes that doesn't quite work depending on where the process engineer role is facing. But certainly within a company like Pandrol, there's a lot of low-hanging fruit. Process engineering is a fairly new thing within Pandrol. So there's a lot of opportunity there, and you can go and stand and watch a production line and pull out some of the process fat, as we would call it. So yes, setting those targets and giving people that healthy competition, and then checking back with people in team meetings. We might have a bit of project management within there to say, okay, so do we need to kick this small improvement off into a bigger one with a wider ranging team, or could it be an individual process improvement? But yeah, creating that healthy competition, and bribery by sugar is normally a good tactic for me. Cakes as kind of prizes, but also that recognition. I think for me, when I was doing process engineering on the shop floor, when I made a saving, when I made a physical cost saving that was verified by the finance team, I felt really proud of what I had done, because that for me is a direct correlation back to the profit margin of the company that I was working for. And that's such a powerful thing, especially being in what is a traditionally office-based job, because in a large corporation you often get quite disconnected from those results. But if you can see a physical pound saving that you've made, for me anyway, as an engineer, it was a super proud moment.
Yeah, absolutely. I've got a question from left field, and mostly for you, Tom. You said you ran a startup that did modular housing. Do you feel like this aspect of either process design or process improvement, do you think that it's generally the same at a startup making modular houses and being in charge of process design for a company like Pandrol? Can you tell me maybe a little bit about some similarities and differences between those, or is it essentially the same at its core?
It's
a hard question.
What for me, wildly different, and there was a kind of key differentiator. I went into the startup as kind of engineering manager, so looking after process engineering and maintenance. And going into the job, I was essentially told that there were no processes. I had to create them all from scratch. But fundamentally, within modular housing, we were using a lot of tradespeople on a production line. So it was less about creating a brand new process on how to wire a house, because we've been doing that for decades, if not longer. But it was how you get what were now operators, i.e. fully qualified electricians that were used to working on building sites, how you bring them into that kind of lean manufacturing environment. So yeah, it was a complete flip. That was for me where I really realised that your operators are the most powerful tool when creating a process. A process engineer, it's very difficult for them to understand the intricacies of every single step, especially on a complex process like building a house. But if you were to get a group of electricians in a room and tell you how to do the wiring, and the process engineer that can then level all the tasks out and make them as efficient as possible, that for me was the flip of the switch. I think before that, it was like, oh, well, the engineer can sit there and kind of figure it out for themselves. But so yeah, seeing that within modular housing was very, 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 very different. And then I think coming into Pandrol, because we are a classic manufacturing company, there's a lot of understanding around what we do from a process perspective. We are fairly automated. Our production lines essentially spit out a finished product except for some of the coatings. So there's not an awful lot of assembly work within there. So there's not the classic kind of timing of individual operations in that sense. So it is a little bit different to what I'm doing now, but there's massive read across in terms of then looking at process efficiency within machinery cycles, and that's where we're trying to balance things out. So yeah, very, very different from modular housing.
Interesting. I was gonna let that go, and then it just kept. It was a little bit of an earworm. I was like, man, it's probably extremely different. Even doing, I think. I didn't grow up in manufacturing, and looking at an industry, I think the layperson's view is like, oh, well, it's a similar environment. They just make different products, right? And you have this idea that, oh, it's an assembly line. How different could it be? And I think, one of the most exciting things that I've learned on my 7-year journey in manufacturing is how completely different, not even between products and companies, but even between locations, like if people haven't standardized effectively, how different processes can vary. And I think it's very cool. Thank you for that.
No worries.
Right.
They're different even within the same company among different locations. Sometimes they can vary greatly for the same outcome. Yeah, it's fascinating.
Yeah, and we have that challenge in Pandrol. It's the factories have been developed over 20, 30, I think some of the remote ones 30 or 40 years. So over that time, they've naturally gone and improved their own processes, which is fantastic. You know, these teams have gone away and tried to work out the best way of doing things over and over and over again. But fundamentally, then the processes have slightly diverged. Now we've got really solid quality systems in place that allow us to do a lot of lab testing, a lot of product testing, so we don't get that risk to the customer. But what we try and then do as a company is bring all those improvements together, because, for example, Brazil might have solved a major issue that we were having in the UK 5 years ago, and if we're not sharing that kind of learning, then fundamentally as a company we're not succeeding, only in one factory.
I think, at least for me, on the software side of the things, that's one of my biggest selling points to people when I talk to them about what does good manufacturing software do, and that's that standardization. That's the visibility between global sites, and of course it's not going to be a copy paste, but it gives you that basis, and you can start basing future improvements off of that stuff. It's cool to see. We talked a little bit about this on our intro call, Tom, but if you could share with me any of your most memorable problem-solving experiences in this industry, and I'm going to ask you the same thing, Michael. Don't worry, I'm gonna come to both of you. But tell me a little bit more about, it's obviously it's all hunky dory when you show up and clock in and everything just runs smoothly and goes well. But that's not how this stuff usually works, right? If you could tell me a little bit more about a particularly complex or challenging problem that you had to solve here at Pandrol or back in your days at Rolls-Royce, I think that would be fantastic, because I know you're a problem solver at heart.
Yeah, I think one of the most memorable ones for me was in my last role within Rolls-Royce. Mm-hmm. So I spent the last 2 years as kind of looking after the maintenance side of the test facilities. Mm-hmm. So they have a series of test beds all over the world that do everything from experimental testing, so firing dead birds into engines, through to blowing up blades, fan blades on the front of the engines. But they also use those test beds for passing off production engines. So every single jet engine that they produce goes through a series of testing before it goes to the customer. Now, on one of the test beds, you can actually get one engine per day. It was a very good cycle of engines running through. So it would generate around 20 to 30 million pounds worth of revenue every day for that one engine. And we, as a team, caused a shutdown for 3 days. By accident within that test bed due to maintenance planning and poor communication across the team. So fundamentally what that boiled down to was a loss of revenue of somewhere between 60 and 90 million pounds. Now the pressure that came on from that was intense, and as a fairly junior engineering manager at the time, I really took that to heart and really used that in my learnings going forward. It was a big challenge to stand there and present as to why it had gone wrong, and I got shut down pretty fast, and it ended up just standing there taking a bit of a hammering, shall we say? But it was character building, as we call it. And as I said, one of those things that really made me learn from it. And then as we moved then into our maintenance planning, we wanted to take the test beds down for 8 days, planned maintenance this time. Now, 8 days multiplied by that number of revenue, and the numbers we're talking about are astronomical. So it was a really hard sell, and my boss at the time was a fantastic guy. I learned a lot from him from a people management side of things. And he really showed me the way of looking at data. Now, we didn't have any automated systems in place collecting this data, but we knew that we needed to get OEE data showing the benefit of shutdowns and planned maintenance, because we'd already done a few and we knew that they were working, but a lot of that was just anecdotal evidence. So he helped me set up an OEE tracker, an OEE metric, and essentially we started to show the differences across the test beds that had maintenance and the ones that hadn't. And fundamentally that data we presented to the executives, and we didn't get the full 8 days. I think from memory we got 6 days shutdown, which was more than anything we could have imagined for. I think we had a plan in our back pocket that if we got 4 days, we would have been able to do a lot of the work. So getting the 6 days was a fantastic result for us. But then the crowning, the jewel in the crown as such, afterwards was then seeing the results of that and seeing the OEE slowly creep up. And every few weeks then I would email my executive with a new little graph showing that OEE was slowly climbing. I wouldn't send it to him when it dropped down a little bit due to some other type of error.
Yeah.
Kept that narrative going as such. So yeah, kind of a big event leading to a lot of learning. And I think that's kind of built one of my philosophies around learning from failure, not trying to walk away from it, not trying to deny that it happened or deny your responsibility in it, but taking that accountability and learning from it.
Cool. I think earlier you were talking about how exciting it is to see an ROI or a cost ROI or something like that. But I think it's a human business at the end of the day, right? It might be a number on a chart, but that represents a lot of stress and hard work and very real emotions on your end too. So I think it's very cool to watch that go and watch that kind of stuff pay off. I'm gonna pick on you, Michael, and I'm gonna fast forward. No, rewind. That's what you call it when you go backwards in time. Maybe before your L2L days, back when you were doing maintenance, when you were leading teams in the factory. Do you have a similar story of a big hairy problem that you had to solve?
Yeah, it's not quite out of the realm of L2L's involvement, but just prior to.
That's okay.
Had to build a maintenance team basically from scratch, and part of that process included teaching them how to do root cause analysis, and we didn't have L2L yet. So teaching that team how to do a basic 5 why analysis. I tried to keep it as simple as possible, give them functional tools that they can do on the fly in order to help drive out some of the downtime. And the downtime was serious business. I don't know about the numbers like Tom was mentioning, but people were held accountable for downtime above 15 or 30 minutes. Like it was very tight. So they had to be able to do this kind of thing on the fly. So none of them had ever done it. None of them even knew what a root cause analysis, well, many of them, even knew what that process looked like. So attacking that problem in such a way that I was teaching about 25 guys how to do this while also trying to drive downtime, I'm very proud of that because it proved very effective. We were able to get them on that bandwagon of just doing your root cause every single time you had a downtime event, and we had I don't have the numbers off the back of my hand, but basically reducing our downtime by an ungodly amount of time, and so it resulted in a lot of money that we uncovered for production capacity. That we got credit for. We didn't have to buy a single piece of equipment for that. And it took about a year. It was very short-term turnaround for that kind of thing. So that was on the cusp of us getting L2L, so it's not quite. And I knew L2L from prior to that, so I had that in mind. I kind of knew what process we were getting. So I'm cheating a little bit with your question, but
that's okay.
It was very nice.
There are no rules here.
Yeah.
And what do you think... What was the secret sauce to it going well? Like, why was it that people engagement? Was it a mindset? Was it something physical that you were able to give them, like a tool?
It was a simplified process that they understood, which they did not at first. Right? Anytime you give a new process to a team like that, especially grizzled and veteran mechanics, sometimes.
Yeah.
It was highlighting the win. So the first time somebody did a root cause analysis, and to Tom's point earlier, effected some change that had either a monetary or an improvement value with their own colleagues, highlighting that to them, I saw the light go off in many of their eyes. Like, this is working, this is effective. And then pretty soon they're doing the work, training their teams, getting people involved. and I don't have to sell it anymore. I can just help refine the process with them. So, yeah.
Yeah. I think Tom, we might have. There's so much that we talked about in our first call that's not going to be able to get recorded. But I think which is a shame, right? I think we talked a little bit about that. Is like if you can show people that something makes the job easier or that it drives the improvement, like that spark is often enough to bring them over and become that champion. You know, they go from not so sure about something new to show them the light, and then all of a sudden they're singing a slightly different tune.
Yeah, I think so. I think as much as I'm I wouldn't say a trained process engineer, but it's part of my career. I think there's a bit of that in maybe not everybody, but a lot of people, and certainly in manufacturing environments. I've not met somebody yet that doesn't get a little bit interested in wanting to improve something they're working on. Now, I think we do it, well, maybe it's just me, but I do it in not just inside of work, but always trying to kind of improve slight bits around how you live your life and stuff. And that for me just transfers over into work. And I think there's certain people that might, on the face of it, show that they might not be interested or they don't care or they're averse to change. But you get one of those guys or girls in a quiet space away from their peers, and for me that's probably some of the most valuable knowledge as well. So yeah, I think everybody eventually kind of gets bought into it and wants to improve what they're working on.
If you can make someone's day easier, it's just bottom line. Sometimes it's as simple as that. Sometimes it's more complex.
I prefer the person that's the crankiest too. If I can turn them around, it's a win.
Absolutely.
Sugary bribes.
That's right.
It works on me. I'll say here first. If you send some cookies to my house, you win me over, 100%. So I wanted to talk a little bit about implementation, and obviously implementing a powerful software, whether it's L2L or something else, it has such a wide range of impacts in manufacturing, and obviously that impacts process. So I actually wanted to start with you, Michael, and I'm throwing a curveball. This isn't necessarily on our topic list, but how do you, when you first land in a factory, a made up factory, how do you approach a guy like Tom and say, who hasn't used L2L before, and say, hey, these are the things we need to think about. This is how we're going to do it. What are your first considerations for someone who designs processes when implementing big software?
Oh wow, good question. I mean, it sounds kind of cliche, but I want to know what is bothering them. I want to know what their pain point is. So, by the time I arrive, I'm not pushing L2L to them. They brought us there. I want to know what their issues are. And while we're doing that kind of exercise, whatever it is, let's say we're touring through the plant and I'm hearing a common theme of, the data we need isn't here, or I don't know what's going on in this area, or something like that. I'm always thinking how to get the system to address what their pain point is before I even talk about L2L to them. So my first step is I need to understand who I'm working with. I need to understand what my customer's pain is. And then that's one of the more critical first steps is addressing that problem. Yeah.
Using your five senses, right? Listening, looking, talking to people. Okay. Interesting. Yeah. I mean, once again, we're coming back to that human interaction, figure out what the motivations are, and how they drive, this work every single day. What's been the process like on your end, Tom? What elements of L2L do you touch on a daily basis, and what kind of considerations did you have to make when starting to work with a tool like that, or any tool like this that comes into your factory in order to help you execute?
Yeah, it's been really good fun so far. So we've got a long-term plan to roll the software out across most of our facilities, and we've just started with the first one in Worksop. So we started that in May, and so that's based in the UK. So we've gone very slowly with it. We wanted to take our time. We wanted to make sure it's sitting right within Pandrol. We are a unique company. We have so many different cultures. We have so many different processes. The rail fastenings part of the business that I deal with isn't the be-all and end-all. We do welding. We do machinery and equipment.
Yeah.
So we needed to check right from the start how holistic our software was. So we created a bit of a matrix, looked at some of the issues that we were going to have. For example, within Pandrol, we have more ERP systems than you could ever imagine. Everyone is slightly different. We're starting a route to standardization there, but that's probably a 10-year journey. So for example, the system needed to be compatible across every different ERP system. So for us, there were some really clear requirements before we even started vendor selection.
Yeah.
But then quite quickly, as we were going through that, a lot of the companies we were looking at, they promised the world, but they didn't have examples of being able to deliver. And for us, that's where L2L kind of came in, looking at some of your implementations before, seeing the companies that you had worked with and some of the positive feedback you had had. And then when we did a factory visit to one of your customers, that kind of sealed the deal for us. And as we've brought more people on board within Pandrol, so my team sits kind of on a global level, but we've then needed to do a bit of a sales pitch ourselves to the individual sites.
Yeah.
So as we've been able to show them some of the examples from you guys, and now show them some of the stuff coming out of the first implementation in Worksop, people are really starting to take note of it and starting to see some of the benefits coming through. But then from a Worksop specific perspective, setting really clear requirements. So as I mentioned, my team, although they sit in Worksop, they're not part of the Worksop site. So there's a real kind of complex interaction that we need to have to make sure that the project engineer within my team is managing it as a project, but the Worksop team then are also coming to the party and starting to actually use the tool, because at some point my team needs to exit from the implementation, just like L2L will, and we'll be moving on to the next project or the next site. What my engineers behind that project engineer are then doing is starting to use the L2L data coming out of Worksop to actually do our process improvements. So as much as the project implementation is finished, it's only just the start. So we've got to then work with the Worksop team to make sure that keeps on developing. So yeah, it's been really, really interesting so far, and still quite fresh for us, but we've got some really interesting data coming out already.
Fantastic. And
Brings a tear to my eye.
I know, right? I'm like smiling throughout that whole thing. I love to hear it. Very cool. And what kind of ROIs from these projects are the most meaningful for you, Tom? Like, what do you love to see? What is good impact from a project like this, or just generally a good process design project? What's what kind of how do you measure that business impact?
I think if you were to ask the business leaders, operational availability would be the kind of big impact that we're looking for. Allowing the site leaders to have more flexibility when they're looking at their shift management. We have a lot of capacity around Pandrol, so it's how we use that in the most optimized way. Yeah. For me, though, the biggest benefit is I now look after the product side as well as process engineering, so I've recently changed roles. For me, it's the standardization. I know that we have some really strong systems in place, certainly in Worksop, and I mentioned around each of the sites around the world have kind of taken it on board themselves to develop their processes. One of the key bits for me within L2L is how we can share that information out. So we have different ERP systems, we have different drawing management systems, but if we have a common MES system with all the same data going into it, all the same quality data, the same manufacturing drawings, the same planned maintenance schedules, because for example at the moment some sites have them, some sites don't, but they've got very similar machinery. So standardizing that, ensuring that the product quality just gets better and better and better. For me, from an engineering side, on a personal level, that's where I see the biggest benefit.
Yeah, that's the win. Well, I've got bad news. We're out of time, but thanks for that. I really appreciated having you both on today. That was about 45, 50 minutes that went really, really quickly. It's a shame. I think we could have talked for probably another hour. But anyways, thank you so much, Tom and Michael, for joining me today. Really appreciate having you both on here. And thank you, everybody, for watching. And with that, I'll say goodbye.
Thanks, Chris.